Hey everyone, welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into something that is honestly a little unsettling but absolutely fascinating. It's called the 8 Rs regime theory. We're going to zero in on two big concepts here, metastability and the executional gap. Essentially, what we're looking at is this massive disconnect, the huge gap between how our economy and our daily lives look on the surface and the underlying hard mathematical reality of their structural integrity. It's a totally different lens for viewing current events, so let's just jump right in. Okay, let's really look at this cognitive dissonance. Think about everyday normalcy versus underlying systemic fragility. When you look out the window or, check your brokerage account, everything seems fine, right? Markets are functioning, people are commuting, the government is doing its routine thing. But behind the scenes, the source material paints a much darker picture, a total depletion of systemic slack. As humans, we're wired to see that calm outward appearance and think, okay, we're good. But the underlying math is screaming extreme structural fragility. To explain how we can have both of these things happening at the exact same time, this report actually ditches traditional economics and borrows a concept straight from the hard sciences. So, moving into section 1, the physics of the economy, entering a state of metastability. To get a grip on how normal markets can mask total fragility, the report uses this brilliant physics analogy, metastability. It argues that our current calm isn't genuine stability at all. It's actually a late-stage behavior characterized by this metastable state. Picture a supercooled liquid. If you take highly purified water, you can actually cool it way down below freezing, and it won't turn into ice right away. It stays liquid. It looks perfectly stable, but it's an artificial, highly precarious fluidity. You could literally just shake the bottle or drop in a tiny seed crystal and boom, the whole thing flash freezes instantly. The huge takeaway here is that our current economic calm, it's not a natural equilibrium. The framework tells us it's a deeply expensive, highly engineered suspension created specifically to hide the fact that we have absolutely zero systemic slack left. Which brings us to section 2, the executional gap, bridging latent fragility to active realization. Now, this might just be the most critical and honestly deceptive mechanism in the entire framework. By focusing on this executional gap, we completely shift how we analyze the situation. We literally stop asking, will the system break? Because, well, the math says the slack is already gone. Instead, we start asking, what exactly is going to force it to break? The model calculates that we only have a final gap left of 7%. Just 7%. Think about how terrifyingly small that is on a macroeconomic scale. We've got a global system vibrating with tension, and it only needs to bridge that tiny 7% gap to go from latent fragility, that supercooled liquid state, into a sudden active realization. It is right on the edge. So what actually pushes it over and shatters the illusion? Well, the report maps this out using what it calls the alpha model scenarios. Here we are at section 3, the 3 kinetic triggers, catalysts for a phase shift. The baseline for this alpha model says we have to watch out for the sudden, simultaneous onset of 3 sequential events. Step 1 is the external shock. That's our seed crystal dropping into the water. Step 2 is the immediate reaction, a visible repricing cascade that leads to a total collapse of the current structural ledger. And step 3? That's the ultimate societal response, formal emergency governance. Because our economic and social systems are so tightly woven together, the framework argues they're basically just waiting for a catalyst to force these 3 dominoes to fall. And the key word here is speed. We aren't talking about a slow recession that takes quarters or years to play out. No, it's an instantaneous cascade. So what exactly acts as that initial seed crystal? The report highlights 3 potential triggers for a synchronized external shock: a massive cyber event, a geopolitical flashpoint, or a sudden complete supply chain severance. We've all seen lately just how incredibly fragile modern just-in-time supply chains really are, right? Because the system is already so tightly coupled and primed, literally any one of these external triggers could strike the bell. And the second that bell rings, the shock is transmitted instantaneously across every single sector of the economy and society. The really crucial part is what happens right after the shock hits in step 2. The framework calls this convex repricing, which is basically the inevitable collapse of the Potemkin ledger. If you aren't familiar, a Potemkin ledger is essentially a fake artificial facade of wealth that's just hiding massive insolvency. The report clinically dictates that when these artificial interventions finally fail, we are not going to see a normal, managed cyclical reset. Since the current interventions are holding back a massive amount of structural pressure, the resolution is a discontinuous gap down, the bottom just falls out and liquidity evaporates in an instant, like there is no buying the dip when the floor itself literally ceases to exist. And that triggers step 3. Right now, political desperation might be driving economic moves behind closed doors, but outward, routine governance looks normal. However, once that external shock hits and the repricing happens, routine governance is over. The report outlines that this will force the implementation of overt emergency measures. We're talking formal martial law, extreme capital controls, or other hard power interventions. And why does this matter to us? Because this is the exact moment the theoretical, mathematical reality actually becomes the physical, everyday reality for the average person. But having mapped out these clinical mechanics, we really need to look at the human element. Moving to Section 4, the danger of complacency, ignoring the executional gap. The framework gives us this really stark warning. Quote, "The defining danger of the executional gap is complacency, the assumption that because the resolution has not yet been forced, the risk is not present." End quote. This is the ultimate trap of the 8-8 regime. It's this darkly ironic flaw in human psychology, right? We are just biologically terrible at perceiving non-linear risks. Just because the supercooled liquid hasn't frozen yet, our brains are screaming, "It's just water, it's totally stable." Assuming we're safe during an artificial, highly engineered suspension is exactly the blind spot this model wants us to confront. And that leaves us with a really provocative thought to wrap up today's explainer. Based on everything we just walked through, the source material leaves us with a final, chilling question to ponder. Which of these 3 kinetic triggers do you want to inject into the alpha model first to simulate the phase shift? Will it be a cyber event, a geopolitical flashpoint, or a severed supply chain that ultimately shatters the supercooled liquid? It's definitely a sobering lens for looking at our complex world, especially when the math suggests we're already living on borrowed time. All right, that's all for this explainer. Stay curious and keep questioning the surface.